Dr. Klein, you are muted.
Yeah, sorry, that was obviously a beginner's mistake. Your Excellencies, Honorable Cabinet Ministers in Bhutan, Honorable Members of Parliament in Bhutan, Honorable Mrs. Bettina Stark-Watzinger, Excellencies, dear panelists, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to welcome you to participate in our online event, Liberty and Happiness in Bhutan. The Friedrich-Naumann Foundation is a German political foundation that promotes liberal values and works in the areas of good governance, rule of law, education, and free market economy, among others. Bhutan is an enduring example of how good governance can form the backbone of democracy. Today's session will focus on cross-national happiness as the central developmental concept in Bhutan and how its four major pillars, good governance, socio-economic development, cultural preservation, and environmental conservation are central to the achievement of freedom and liberty. We anticipate that with this online event, Friedrich-Naumann Foundation will enhance the visibility of Bhutan within Germany and amongst German public. My sincere thanks to our panelists, Honorable Dajo Benji, Honorable Dr. Pasang Doji, and Mr. Pramit Pal Chaudhry. Thanks for agreeing to be part of this panel. We are very delighted to have you here and share your views with us. And thanks to you, Mr. Gopilal Acharya, for moderating this session. But now I would like to make a special mention of Mr. Reinhard Wolf from the German Bhutan Himalaya Society for his very valuable insights on Bhutan, as well as for supporting our event. Ladies and gentlemen, I have now the pleasure of introducing to you our keynote speaker, Mrs. Bettina Stark-Watzinger, who has been a member of the German Bundestag since 2017. Mrs. Stark-Watzinger has also been a member of the board of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation since 2018. From 2015 to 2019, she was the General Secretary of the FDP in the federal state of Hesse and has recently been elected as new state chair of the FDP in Hesse. She has been a member of the Federal Executive Committee since 2017, and in 2020, she also was elected party whip of the FDP parliamentary group in the German Bundestag. Before I give the floor over to you, Mrs. Stark-Watzinger, I would like to take you on a virtual trip to Bhutan. Here is a very short 2-minute video on the land of the thunder dragon, showing you some aspects of Bhutan's beautiful and dramatic scenery. This video is produced by Mr. Choling. He is a self-taught cinematographer, editor, and photographer. Thank you very much, and Tashi Delek.
wonderful pictures we've just seen here. His Excellencies, Honorable Cabinet Ministers from Bhutan, Honorable Member of Parliament from Bhutan, dear Dr. Carsten Klein, dear panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank Dr. Klein for his kind introductory words, and it is a pleasure for me to be here tonight, this evening among this distinguished panel. Keynote is a big word. We are here to discuss and learn about Bhutan. And this is why I would rather have some introductory words, which I would like to address to you. I'm very happy that we have this evening together, this discussion together, because I think we've seen over the past few weeks and months that freedom has to be protected, that the way a society overcomes challenges has a lot to do with the state a society is in with. And this has to deal with how can we have good governance, but also have sustainable development in our countries when it comes to ecological, economical and societal issues. So, esteemed Deputy Minister Pajor Jingme, it is indeed our great honor for Friedrich-Naumann-Foundation for Freedom to have you here today. And thank you, Mr. Pramit Pal Chaudhuri, Dr. Pasang Dorji, and Mr. Gopal Acharya to be part of this panel. The title of today's event is Liberty and Happiness in Bhutan. When I think of Bhutan, and I've just seen it in the video, I visualized Himalayan mountains under colorful prayer flags with trees and lush green landscape, and that alone brings joyfulness as such. And of course, the Himalayan Kingdom's world famous gross national happiness, GNH, the preservation of its culture and the environment. In today's world, what more can be important than happiness of people and protection of the environment? Unfortunately, so far, I did not have the opportunity to travel to Bhutan. But here in my home country, I did have the chance to meet people from Bhutan. And what stood out was one unique attribute they share. And this is the importance they place on time. Taking time to think, time with family, time to breathe, a recognition of time and experience that is passed on by previous generations, and the importance of future generational equity. This appreciation for time, reflection, and the ability to pursue, to pause, is something that many Western cultures have lost. And this is why I'm sure we have a lot to learn from Bhutan. In a world that is turning mechanical, owing largely to advances in technology, which are good as such, and an emphasis on economic success, this, I should say, small but powerful country sets an example worth noting. The developmental path the country has chosen is deeply rooted in culture, and therefore, of course, it cannot be easily transferred to other countries. However, we can learn to slow down and focus more on our mental well-being, which is a source of power, energy, and living together. The last 1 year has a case in point. And I'm very happy that the governments of the Federal Republic of Germany and the Kingdom of Bhutan have ties going back for decades, resulting eventually, finally last year, in both countries establishing formal diplomatic ties. Bhutan has agreed to let Germany set up an honorary consulate in Thimphu, and Bhutan's diplomatic interests are pursued primarily through its missions to the EU. The two countries share interests in the field of climate policy and the preservation of a rules-based multilateral international order. And now with the United States being back there, there is good hope that we can have sustainable development there as well. On the cultural front, Germany has in recent years supported cultural preservation products in Bhutan. Let me mention just that since March 2019, the Federal Foreign Office has been providing support for a joint project of the Bhutan German Himalayan Society and the National Library of Bhutan in order to preserve the traditional Bhutanese manuscripts. Let me now deviate a bit from my prepared remarks and let me express that there is another happiness might be coming to Germany from Bhutan. It's because we have the European Football Championship starting soon, and Bhutan here in Germany makes headlines in many ways. The happiness of its inhabitants, as I already said, and as that being a state goal, but also, and that was mentioned already, that among the approximately 800,000 inhabitants, they received their first corona vaccination within a week. That made headlines here in Germany. However, so far Bhutan is less known for soccer. And that's exactly what might change now with Chenjo Gilchen, if I pronounce him correctly. I just learned that the Bhutan Beckham, playing in India right now, which is a megastar in your country, might consider to come to Germany. And I would say sharing emotions together, two countries, emotions in sports, that could bring our countries closer together as well. So we're looking forward to that. But back to the important role of Bhutan that Bhutan plays in South Asia. Bhutan has contributed in SAARC in its own humble way towards the realization of a peaceful and a prosperous South Asia. Bhutan pursues a balanced approach to economic development, which we discuss in Germany right now, and which could serve as an inspiration for countries around the world. People of Bhutan have proven in the past that the transition from a monarchy to a democracy does not have to be accompanied by violence or bloodshed. You have proven that the protection of the environment can succeed. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion on how Bhutan measures gross national happiness, especially against the backdrop of the pandemic crisis. And I'm of course curious to understand what other countries, Germany included, can learn from Bhutan. So I wish all participants an exciting and fruitful discussion, and I would really sincerely like to say thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Stark-Watzinger, for your keynote address. We hope to welcome you soon in South Asia, especially in Bhutan. Namaste, guten Abend, and good evening. I'm Nupur Hasija, Senior Program Manager at FNF New Delhi office. I have the pleasure to introduce you to today's moderator, Gopilal Acharya. Gopilal Acharya is an independent consultant and freelance journalist. He was educated in Bhutan and Sweden. He's an award-winning writer, journalist with a career spanning 20 years in media and communication industry. He has worked in Bhutan, Nepal, Singapore, and India. He worked as a chief editor of Bhutan's first English language private newspaper, Bhutan Times, and later founded a weekly newspaper, The Journalist. Thanks, Gopi, for agreeing to moderate today's event. Now I hand over the proceedings of event to you.
Where's Gopilal?
It seems that we have technical problems. Mrs. Haziai, your microphone is not open, so we can't hear you.
Yeah, I think we have lost Gopi.
What a terrible time to lose him. Let me give him a call.
I call him, he says some technical problem. Should we do something boring and just introduce the panelists and get that out of?
Yes, that's what I will do. We will wait for Gopi to come back. He's having some technical problems. Meanwhile, I will just introduce you to the panelist. I have a pleasure to introduce you to Dasho Paljor J. Dorji. He's the Deputy Minister and Special Advisor, National Environment Commission Thimphu, often referred to as Bhutan's godfather of conservation. He established Bhutan's first non-governmental organization, the Royal Society for the Protection of Nature, in 1987, to conserve the country's black-necked crane population and to preserve the country's biodiversity in general. Dasho Benji has served in the government of Bhutan as early as 1969. He served as an advisor to the former King of Bhutan, His Majesty, King Jigme Singye Wangchuck. As a diplomat, he served as ambassador to the United Nations and European capitals from 1991 to 1994. Thank you, Dasho Benji, for being part of today's event. Now I have the pleasure to introduce you to our old friend, Mr. Pramit Pal Chaudhary. He's a senior columnist with the Hindustan Times and distinguished fellow of the Ananta Aspen Center. He served on the Prime Minister's National Security Advisory Board from 2011 to 2015 and is an advisor to the Rhodium Group, New York. As a member of the Aspen Strategic Group of India, he is member of Track 2 Strategic Dialogues between India and US, Japan, Israel, and South Korea. He is also part of 2 climate and energy dialogues with the US and UK. Thank you so much, Pramit, to be part of this session today. Thank you, Dr. Pasang Dorji. I have a pleasure to introduce you today. Dr. Pasang Dorji is a student of international politics and specializes in China and India's relations with smaller states in their immediate neighborhood, especially Bhutan and Nepal. He believes that life is the greatest teacher and asking question a key of understanding things that shapes one's life and living. He was a journalist before venturing into academia and politics. At present, he is the member of parliament and also the chairman of Human Rights and Foreign Relations Committee of the National Assembly of Bhutan. Over to you, Gopi.
Thank you. And again, as we say in Bhutan, Kuzu Zongpo La to all of you. Good evening, namaste. And I'm sorry I disappeared for a few seconds because of some technical glitch. But again, Honorable Madam Watzinger, Dr. Carlston, Dasho Paljor J. Dorji, who we fondly call Dasho Benji in Bhutan, my friend Dr. Pasang, and our friend from India, Mr. Pramit, Ms. Nupur, and all of our distinguished guests here who are together with us on this online platform to discuss about Bhutan and the country's development philosophy of GNH and various other aspects. I'm very happy to have the 3 wonderful panelists here. Thank you, Ms. Nupur, for the introduction. Let me, get on with my own little remark. Bhutan is a fairly young country in the sense that, we were not that well known until last 30, 40 years ago. In terms of modern development, we started, only in 1961 with the first 5-year plan. And, in the next 70 years, I think the country has made a lot of, progress in various aspects of development, of the country as well as in terms of people's life. Obviously, as you know, that Bhutan's development philosophy hinges on, on the happiness of its people. Our kings, our, hereditary monarchs have always placed, the happiness and welfare and well-being of our people at the center of all development efforts. And that's where I guess the idea of happiness vis-a-vis the idea of liberty comes in a broader picture. We in Bhutan, we believe in the liberty of our minds, not necessarily in terms of in a more in a more Western perspective, but here we believe in the idea of liberating ourselves from everyday sufferings, and this is where the idea of development comes in. We use the instruments and tools of development to uplift human conditions. Obviously, that's where GNH comes in. Bhutan is a developing country. We struggle with resources. We struggle with, in terms of very many, challenges that we face as a small, landlocked, developing country that is situated between two rising giants of Asia, China up north and India down south. And nevertheless, I think Bhutan has been able to, with the guidance and visions of our monarchs, we have been able to carve our own identity despite being very small in size. Today, Bhutan is well known. I think we have made ourselves heard at the global forums, thanks to our fourth His Majesty's vision of gross national happiness. And obviously, we also have had other areas which have contributed to building this unique identity, a small nation, but that could offer a lot to the countries around the world in terms of, I think, in terms of more human values that lie at the core of Bhutanese society. In Bhutan's economy today depends mostly on hydropower production, which we sell to India. We're also trying to diversify our economy to other areas so that we don't so that we build a more resilient economy that is not dependent solely on one sector. Because of climate change, we are worried that hydropower sector could face a lot of challenges as the glaciers retreat and river flows fluctuate and rainfall also become unpredictable. We know the situation of we know the dangers of depending on a single source of revenue for our development aspirations. So we are on the way to diversifying our economy. In education, again, education in Bhutan started in 1961, formal education with establishment of a number of schools, and our education system has English medium. That's why most literate Bhutanese who have been to schools are fairly fluent in English, and we consider English as our major strength, despite the importance that we lay on our national language, because that is part of who we are. We are looking at reforming education sector today and making it more responsive to the emerging challenges, and also making it more ready to grasp opportunities that technologies are ushering in. Politically, Bhutan has been a hereditary monarchy from 1907 up until 2008, when Bhutanese went to the poll and elected the first democratic government. Obviously, our system is democratic constitutional monarchy. We have our His Majesty the King at the top, and then we have a bicameral system of parliament, upper house and a lower house. Upper house represents five eminent members and representatives from 20 districts, one representative each from 20 districts. Then we have the lower house that forms the National Assembly. We have elected members of parliament from 47 constituencies. In 2008, we had the first election, 2013 the second, and 2018 the third. In all three general elections, we have seen new governments come in. And I think that's been a wonderful opportunity for us to actually experiment with the idea of democracy when we have elected leaders from different parties coming into consolidate Bhutan and our aspirations through common goals and through common national goals. We're still learning politically. We are still infant. We have a lot of things to learn. But the good thing is we have GNH places importance in good governance. And I think the idea of good governance has been ingrained in the idea of politics, which I think is very important. Environmentally, I think we have kind of positioned ourselves as a thought leader. Obviously, as a small country, it's very difficult to, shout out in the global arena. But I guess our own small policies that have served us very well, with more than 70% of our land still under forest coverage, and the country being carbon negative, and also I think our political leadership having committed, to remain carbon negative or neutral for a very long time speaks a lot about what Bhutan, aspires to go in the near future. Obviously, pandemic has hit the country as many as other countries around the world. But then again, our small size has been of great benefit to us. On the top, we have had a very committed leadership right from His Majesty the King, who is number one frontliner, I should say, because all the time in the south, in the most risky areas, leading, other frontliners, doctors and security personnel and volunteers and, many other, frontline workers, guiding them, giving ideas, coming up with, creative solutions. And obviously, I think laying the grand vision to fight this unseen enemy. So I think we have been very successful so far. We also had good luck, I think, of having a medical doctor as the Prime Minister, as well as two public health professionals heading the health ministry and the foreign ministry. So it's been a good combination of leadership, which I think Bhutan probably, we enjoyed this, very uniquely at this moment, at least. And all of that has been really, good for us. And I think so far, with only one death recorded because of COVID-19, we have some level of community transmission going on, but things are under control. And we are very hopeful that we'll come out of this pandemic, much more stronger. And obviously, there's a lot of work for us to do, rebuild our economy, look back, and also, look back and also take note of the lessons that we have learned during these hard times, and learn from them to build a more resilient country as we move into, the next maybe century. Now, I would like to hand, this over to Dasho Paljo Jedoji, one of the very well-known figures in the country. And obviously, he is basically, I would say, encyclopedia in Bhutan's history, and especially modern history. So Dasho, I'd like to hand this over to you, Dasho, for your introductory remarks. Dasho, I think you need to switch on your voice recording. Yes. Last Dasho, finally.
Oh, we got that. Thank you very much, Gopilal. Honorable panelists, honorable members of the Institute, and our chief guest, Bettina, thank you very much for having me on this discussion. And I hope in my own small way, I will be able to contribute to you with telling you a little bit of background between Bhutan-German relations from the past. But before I start, I think I'd like to, Nupur, correct you a little bit. You mentioned that I am an advisor to my Lord and Master, the Fourth King. That's a misconception. I was never an advisor to His Majesty. just a good servant. And I was very privileged to be a servant to His Majesty. And with His Majesty's blessings, political will and support, I was able to do many things, and especially in the field of conservation, later on to climate change and environment, and activities, all which have led to people calling me the godfather of Bhutan's environment, but conservation. But really, my master is the true leader, because it was with his political will and vision that I was able to do all the things that I'm said to have done. Bettina, if I may call you Bettina, thank you very much for your introductory address. You seem to have met all the right Bhutanese people who gave you all about all the right values that we have in Bhutan. And I hope that I will be able to discuss about this, take this a little further, a little later on in my discussions. But, you know, firstly, I would like to congratulate both Germany and Bhutan for establishing German-Bhutan diplomatic ties. Finally, after so many years, I have been not loud enough maybe, but over the many, many years, while serving as ambassador to the United Nations, and even before that, always tried to promote the establishment of diplomatic ties between Bhutan and Germany. I've always said that if you want to talk Europe, you must talk Germany. And it is very important that Bhutan establishes ties with Germany. I've also had the pleasure of interacting with many senior members of the German Foreign Ministry. I have friends with them. Some of them I will mention in a while. And they have also always been very keen to help Bhutan. But they keep telling me that if we are going to go any further and help you in a true, meaningful way, we must have channels of communication, and that's diplomatic ties. And that took too long in coming. But finally, it is here. And I hope my dear colleagues who are listening in the government, the decision makers, will take this opportunity to take German-Bhutan friendship much further along the way. To go back, interaction between Germans and Bhutanese. The first one I can go back to is a lady who was a personal friend of Mrs. Indira Gandhi. Her name was Gisela Bon. Gisela used to bring tourists. She was a Tibetologist and bring cultural tourists to Bhutan. And she also then developed, through Mrs. Gandhi's introduction, became a friend of His Majesty, our third king, and then later his successor, our great fourth king. And Gisela and I also interacted a lot because I had to be one of her tour guides because I was getting orders from the palace to show her around Parodzong. And but she was a wonderful lady who did a great deal to promote Bhutan in Germany. Then came a young diplomat stationed in New Delhi called Klaus Meixner, who was a good friend of my brother Topgay. And he came here, and he then introduced us to another friend of his, who later became an ambassador, Harold Nestroy. Ambassador Harold Nestroy, and they came here. Harold Nestroy made the second trip with, he was a cancer patient. He had a stomach cancer and he was recovering from his thing. And he brought his doctors along and showed along. And maybe they did want to help Bhutan in some way, but they tried to maybe indirectly. They told me that they were planning to build a little dispensary hospital in South India. So I mentioned to him, I said, why, Harold, why in India? You know, India is such a big country. What impact will you make? A small little thing, you will be able to make no impact whatsoever. But if you could take that same budget and build, you would be able to build quite a decent hospital here in Bhutan and make a tremendous impact. And so they took this idea, this suggestion, and then they started the German-Bhutan Hospital. And this opened doors for Harold. He met His Majesty. They were so, and anybody who meets His Majesty, the fourth king, is floored immediately. I know many, many great people who have met His Majesty, and they all come back, and all Bhutan's problems are solved. Everything is understood. And then their desire to help Bhutan is redoubled. And this happened with Harold Nestroy. And he, of course, with his beautiful wife, Angela, they continued the support, and they then ended up in giving more and more assistance to Bhutan. And they built this bridge across the Punakha. You know the one, the little German, there's a little plaque there built by the German-Bhutan friendship. And that was Ambassador Harold Nestroy and his team who built it. Go back a little bit. When I was in Germany, I met a senior minister, one of the senior ambassadors, Mola, I think it was, and Ambassador Stankina, who at one time used to be the trade ambassador for Germany and India, and whose wife happens to be the daughter of Mr. Choki Talukta, a very dear and good friend of Bhutan, and someone I have known as a little girl ever since they were little children. She and the whole family, they were great friends of the Doji family. And they also, in their own ways, tried to help Bhutan as much as possible. And then coming back to Bhutan, when I started working with the social ministry, and then I met Dr. Cornelia Richter. She was initially a consultant, and then later on the head of GTZ, which today is GIZ, I believe. And she played in a very important role, but unfortunately, because of our lack of diplomatic relations, the GTZ also had to pull out of Bhutan. And that was very sad. But we kept on communicating with each other, and Connie Richter kept on suggesting ways how we could continue working and building German-Bhutan relations. And I don't know, I've lost touch with her now, but I'm deeply grateful for all these people for continuing that. And my last experience in the interaction with Germans was when we made The Birds of Heaven, a film on the black-necked crane made by Dr. Christian Hermann. And they made a wonderful, wonderful film on the black-necked cranes in Popchika. And they asked me to take part in it. I was very privileged enough to take part in it. And it was screened in Germany. I think it was quite well received. And that is my interaction, what I can tell you about how we have moved in the past to build. Now coming to today,
Dr.
Grateful. Yes?
Dashu, can I now move to the next
yes,
speaker?
You may, definitely. Definitely.
Yes. Okay, so let's now, thank you, Dashu, so much. Very wonderful, I think, fascinating historical information about Bhutan's interaction with Germany, mainly through, obviously, the good friends of our royal family in Bhutan. And now I would like to ask Mr. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, who knows Bhutan quite deeply because of his frequent engagements in Bhutan with our royal, the Institute for Strategic Governance and Strategic Studies in Phuntsholing, as well as a journalist. I think he has visited Bhutan a number of times. So, Mr. Pramit, I would like to, take us to how do you look at Bhutan from the lens of an outsider, who has kept your eye on this small developing country, and obviously its geostrategic location between the two giant neighbors.
So thanks, Gopi. Yes, I'll talk briefly, I think, about what we can go into details in further detail, but I think, yes, 3 points that I'll try to point out, 3 challenges that I see Bhutan facing. Bhutan, as all of you will know, is a unique country, the last, if you wish, of the Mahayana Buddhist kingdoms of the Himalayas that used to run all the way up to Mongolia and all the way up to Ladakh. And I visited, if you go to places like Xinjiang in China, you'll see the remnants of ancient Buddhist kingdoms and buildings all scattered all across the deserts there, and realized just how far, in many ways, the Mahayana culture had spread at its height. And today, in many ways, Bhutan is the last holdout, if you wish, from what used to be one of the largest civilizational spreads in Asia. And Bhutan has survived, and one of the reasons, one of the unique things about it is that it has been able to make the case, if you wish, to its neighbors, notably India, it's arguably its most important neighbor, but to other countries as well, that the preservation of Bhutan is important and deserves to be supported. But Bhutan has, I would argue, three key challenges. There are others, but three key challenges that it will be facing over the coming decades. The first one, which others can, I'm sure, speak about in as much more detail than I will, is climate, as you've mentioned already. Glacial lake outbursts are now a phenomenon all across the Himalayas. There have been a few cases already in Bhutan. Bhutan has over 2,600 glacial lakes, of which about 3 or 4% are already in danger, and more will continue to be. I think 70% of Bhutan's population lives along these glacial river valleys. And as you mentioned, hydropower continues to be the primary source of revenue for the economy. And while that is likely to, in fact, may potentially increase with glacial outflow, it is not necessarily the best way to sustain your economy in a moment of climate change. There will be other factors, agriculture. My mother is from Kuch Bihar, from the Duars region, and we can see the tea gardens in places like Darjeeling are slowly dying because they are getting too warm to grow tea. And this is something that will transform. The great Bengal tea companies like Makai Bari and so on are no longer expanding up in North Bengal. They're growing their tea in places like Malawi in Africa, Kenya, because they don't know where else to go. And this is going to affect places like Bhutan as well. And it's something that it's not so much, Bhutan, as we all know, is the only carbon negative country in the world. It has, when President Biden has called for a global climate summit of 40 countries, it was in acknowledgement of Bhutan's accomplishments on the carbon and climate side that he chose Bhutan as one of those 40 countries. Pakistan, a country of almost 200 million people, they did not get an invitation, and it was noted in the Pakistani press that we didn't get invited, but Bhutan made it. And it was because of what Bhutan is already known for in climate circles, of what it has accomplished. But that does not mean necessarily, of course, that Bhutan has solved its problems, because one country, climate is a global issue, it cannot be solved by one country. And climate resilience is going to be one of the biggest challenges for Bhutan. Bhutan may be carbon negative, but it will suffer because other countries will continue to fail on the carbon front for quite some time, and that will have an impact. And preparing for that consequences is something that will be an enormous challenge for a country, any country, but definitely one like Bhutan in a very fragile ecosystem in the Himalayas. The second issue is the economy, as we've already mentioned, the need for diversification. COVID is a reminder that one other pillar of Bhutan's economy, tourism, is also highly sensitive to external forces that are often beyond control, unpredictable. And it's again very difficult. Bhutan rightly does not want to develop an industrial infrastructure, given its own environmental requirements and position. But it does not want to go into mining or into other things. And tourism itself is also can be devastating. There's a limit to how many tourists a country the size of Bhutan can accept. And therefore, what you can extract from tourism has to be weighed against the damage, if you wish, of having, let's say, if you can't really open your door to 1 million tourists every year. That's simply not possible, I would argue, for a country the size of Bhutan. So the economy is going to be another issue. And I think many of us know, we've been to Bhutan many times, that employment continues to be a problem among young Bhutanese. And then finally, we'll talk about what Gopi began with, and I think in many ways this arguably is the most dangerous crisis that you face, challenge that you'll face, is what is now increasingly, I'll use an expression from the American strategic documents of recent times, the return of great power rivalry in the world. That the brief interregnum between the end of the Cold War and roughly about 10 years ago is now basically over. And you can see great power politics coming into play. And besides what the great powers may do, the real concern should be, and rightly so, is what the countries that are caught in between the great powers, how will they survive and how do they play their cards? Bhutan is probably the most perfect example because it is sandwiched between China and India, right along one of the most heavily armed borders in the world, and a border that unfortunately is becoming increasingly violent. India and China have not lost, nobody has died of violence between India and China since the mid-1980s. Now, unfortunately, of course, we had a case last year where we did see violence in which at least 20 Indian soldiers and probably a very similar number of Chinese soldiers were killed. But if you just generally put a graph on it, the number of incidents between India and China militarily along that border has been slowly increasing over the past 10 years. And over the past 4...
Prabhadash, I'll get back to you now. Sorry to interfere. Being a moderator, I have to play that. Welcome, Dr. Pasang now. Interestingly, Dr. Pasang's, I guess, let me first make this clear that Dr. Pasang is here today, not in the capacity of his position as a member of parliament, but in his own individual capacity as a scholar and as a citizen of Bhutan. So, Dr. Pasang, interestingly, your area of, I guess, interest is also what Mr. Pramit was talking about. So, please, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gopilal, the moderator of the session. And as the previous speakers addressed, I believe we have cabinet ministers of Bhutan and some of the honorable members of parliament. My greetings, and also my greetings to the honorable member of parliament, who was also a keynote speaker out there and co-panelist. Since we have participants from different countries and continents, so maybe I will not restrict to wishing as good evening or good afternoon. I have been told to talk on the liberty and happiness in Bhutan. While this is a broad subject, it can be looked at from intellectual, philosophical, moral, even from utilitarian point of view. But I would like to just make my remarks based on the causal relationships of these three ideas: liberty, happiness, democracy, and their relevance, the causal relationships relevance to Bhutanese politics and the social system. We have been often named or called by the international comrades that Bhutan is the happiest country in the world. Yes, maybe this could be one of the perspectives to look at, but as far as I understand, Bhutan might not be the happiest country, but I think Bhutan is the only country that has made the happiness its national goal. So that we are proud about it. And when we talk about the gross national happiness in Bhutan, I think it's very important for us to look at from the constitutional point of view. We have the constitutional mandate. The state actually has the constitutional mandate to create enabling conditions for citizens to pursue happiness. That I think is very wonderful. And also, when we talk about liberty, I think it's a broad concept. If we go back to philosophical history, one of the authoritative author on liberty is John S. Mill, the 19th century British parliamentarian and philosopher. According to him, liberty is all about having individual choice, whatever it may be, unless it harms others. But here in Bhutan, we have, the constitution says that every person has the right to liberty, life, and also to pursue his or her happiness. But also, there are some sort of check and balances that your liberty cannot be exercised at the cost of others' freedom, others' happiness. So what I'm trying to tell is that we have a very balanced constitution that promotes liberty, happiness, at the same time that respects others' happiness as well, and the liberty. So when we talk about the happiness and democracy, the research says that if a country is democratic, then there is some level of happiness more than countries that are not democratic. But here in Bhutan, we are a democratic constitutional monarchy, and we are a new democracy. We are not a full-fledged democracy. We are an emerging democracy. But as my opinion is that we have been doing very well under the leadership of His Majesty the King, and like Mr. Gopilal Acharya mentioned, that we had 3 different political parties coming to power in the last 3 elections. That is, I think, one of the biggest achievements that Bhutan made in its in the exercise of implementing the polity of democracy. So therefore, when we talk about happiness, so often we have been said that happiness is a place. So maybe Bhutan, we say that Bhutan is a place where we try to strike a balance between the pursuit of materialism and spiritualism. So when we talk about gross national happiness, we are not saying that economic development is not important. What we are saying is that as a nation, as citizens, we must be able to strike a core of balance between the pursuit of spiritualism and materialism. So I argue that economic growth is a means to an end, that is happiness. So my final remark or a statement in this section is that we have a constitution that protects liberty and promotes happiness, and at the same time that does not actually make the purpose of a nation just to pursue economic growth at the cost of happiness and the welfare of the citizen. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pasang. I think you gave us a more philosophical perspective on the idea of happiness and liberty vis-a-vis the system of governance that either guarantees or doesn't the public space for people to pursue both liberty, idea of liberty and happiness. Let's now go back to Dasho Benji again, Dasho. Dasho, you may want to pick up from where you left, or you might want to start from where other 2 panelists stopped. Dasho, you might have to switch on your again.
Okay, I won't touch on conservation and environment because that's something once I get going, there's no stopping me. But I will request the indulgence indulgence of the panelists and all the viewers and our honorable friends in Germany, that during this wonderful interaction, it's really wonderful that when you start building up a friendship, we have to have this interaction between governments, between civil societies, at all different levels, cultural interaction. And indeed, I'm very grateful that the institute, the Friedrich-Naumann Institute, Friedrich, has taken this challenge up, this baton, and to further our thing. When we talk about, let's talk about gross national happiness. And I keep wanting to say this because I want people to have a vision as to how this thing got off. And when His Majesty initially started and spoke about gross national happiness, he was really talking about our value systems. He was trying to tell his people that we're going to be bringing development. Changes are going to happen. But while all this is happening and our lives are going to get better, we must not lose sight of our values, our family values, our values for our elders, for our values for our religion. These values, they said, once lost, we will never be able to buy back. And I think this is one very important. And when we talk about happiness and gross national happiness, we have much water has flown under the bridges of this and on this wonderful journey of ours. And today, when I look at gross national happiness, I look at it like a holy grail. A holy grail, and every time we try to come near the grail, it goes further away. As time passes, focuses change, times change, governments change, people, and because it changes, it's so much alive. Because if it doesn't change, then it's dead. So I look at how do we measure, or how do we look at, not measure, I don't think one can measure happiness. And that's where a lot of people who talk about happiness go wrong, is they try to measure happiness. You can't measure happiness, it's a personal thing. And people get mixed up between individual happiness and a national happiness. So we talk about national happiness. And when we talk about national happiness, we want to look at the indicators. So like the director of the institute in Delhi was mentioning, the value systems that they promote are the same value systems that our desire to achieve in gross national happiness is the indicators that in our country, that these indicators that are we going in the right direction? Democracy, justice for all, good governance, good environmental governance, education for all, justice, and all these indicators, if they're in the right direction, we are heading in the right direction. We should look at happiness, gross national happiness, by these indicators, not by measuring whether you have a television or a car or whatever. Are you happy? So I will leave this as a final message. And these are all the same value systems which the Institute, which we are forming a relationship with to further our friendship with Germany, promotes. And I want to thank you all for bearing with me. Thank you very much, Gopilal.
Thank you, Dasha. Thank you so much. Now let's go back to Mr. Pramit. You might want to continue from where you left.
Sure. I'll talk again a little, then I'll continue about where I began on India and China and the challenge that deteriorating relationship poses for Bhutan's unique political polity and culture. So let's put it this way. We've had over the past, under the present Modi government, there was a slightly schizophrenic relationship between India and China because at the highest level between Xi Jinping and Modi, we saw Xi indicating repeatedly, they had 11 meetings between the two of them over the past 6 years, indicating his desire for a changed relationship with India and an improved relationship with India. However, on the ground, we found no evidence of this new relationship or inclination. If anything, we found the relationship getting worse, both in terms of military clashes, diplomatic battles in places like the UN or the Nuclear Suppliers Group. And of course, one of those crises was right next to Bhutan in the Dolam Plateau. And we saw, of course, most recently in the Galwan Valley in Ladakh on the other side of the Himalayas. Now there is an assumption in the Indian side that the past, should we say, 2 or 3 decades of Sino-Indian relations has now fundamentally changed. There is a new attitude, if you wish, in Beijing, that previously both sides sought to have a certain modus vivendi, if you wish, an understanding between the two sides as to what were the red lines in their relationship. Their assumption now is that China actually is no longer interested in getting that type of an understanding. And China, in fact, will continue to push harder and harder, largely because of a sense of its much greater political and economic clout. Chinese officials are very open in telling Indian officials, we are 5 times your size. That's in terms of GDP. And therefore, Chinese are not overly concerned about the concept of happiness, I think. But for them, it's hardcore measures of standard economic power. So therefore, India should not really be arguing for a degree of an understanding between the two, but rather accepting a subordinate position to China. This means that effectively now India and China are on will be and will continue to be, I think, for at least another maybe 10, 20 years, a deteriorating relationship. And you can see that India has begun tacking in against China by moving much closer to the United States. All these organizations like the Quad and so on are in fact manifestations of this policy. So for Bhutan, if you wish, the preservation of freedom and happiness in Bhutan now requires Bhutan to also become, it always has been, but now it has to become doubly so, very nimble, if you wish, in geopolitics. And this is something that will be extremely important over the next 20 years, not just for Bhutan, but for almost any country that is caught between these great powers as they sort of grind into each other. And that's going to be, I think, as I said, the largest challenge in many ways that Bhutan will face. And it will be particularly difficult because for obvious reasons, Bhutan is much closer to India than it is to China. For both historical, geographical, and other reasons. But Bhutan will then have to walk an extremely difficult tightrope between these two countries as this moves forward. And to some degree, one way to help Bhutan to help position itself in this is to reach out to third countries. And Europe and other places are some of the areas they should be looking at. I'll end there and just see if there are. I can see questions are starting to arise, but we can address it further in the next round.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pramit. A really very good, I think, perspective on the changing dynamics of Indo-China relations and what it means to Bhutan. Let's now go back to Dr. Pasang Dorji for your comment. And then after this, we'll open to the audience. We have a number of questions that have come in, and I will be throwing these questions to the panelists, and some are directed to specific panelists, some to general. So we'll go to this after Dr. Pasang. So Dr. Pasang, please continue.
Okay, thank you. In my opening remark, I said that I will try to look at the causal relationship between the ideas of liberty, happiness, and democracy. So for the international audience, I would like to read out some of the constitutional provisions that actually address some of the ideas that we are discussing here. One of our constitutional provisions actually mandates the state to promote happiness of the people it states that the state shall strive to promote those conditions that will enable the pursuit of gross national happiness. This is the constitutional mandate on the state to enhance gross national happiness for the people. And similarly, the concept of happiness in Bhutan goes back to the 17th century. The founder of the nation, called Jabdung Ngawang Namgyel, said that the core responsibility of the government is to provide happiness, ensure happiness for its people. So this, and when we talk about happiness and the relationship between democracy, so I looked at democracy as respecting the sovereign character of the people. So this also our constitution addresses. The very first article of the constitution says that Bhutan is a sovereign kingdom and the sovereign power belongs to the people of Bhutan. The anchoring of sovereignty in its people, in that essence, is very democratic, very liberal. So the idea of happiness, the liberty and democracy have causal relationship, and they reinforce each other in the Bhutanese context. When I talk about happiness, maybe some of the international audience must be thinking that all Bhutan has is smiling faces, and they are sort of fairy tale characters. Maybe that could be wrong. We have made gross national happiness as our national goal and collective national pursuit, but it does not mean that we don't have problems. We have problems like any other developing countries, like unemployment problem, like Ramit mentioned, climate change. We have our own shares of problem. But what we are clear about is where we want to go as a nation under the leadership of our kings. Very recently, His Majesty the King has commanded us that we must reform our civil service and education system. And those reforms must befit the demands of the 21st century. So maybe in our next meeting or next conversation, maybe it would be very interesting to look at Bhutan's vision for 21st century and the reforms taking place and the vision of the king. So maybe if there are any relevant questions to the things that I have mentioned, I will be very happy to address them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pasang. So we will now go to the questions. There are a number of questions that I have here from the member of audience. The first question is, this is from Anup Prakash Ashwathi, addressed to Dr. Pasang or Dr. Benji. The question reads, pandemic burdens executive administration with imposing strict restrictions on people's mobility and regulating their social behavior, which often results in taking away their freedom. Sweeping powers enjoyed by the administration during these testing times are often overused, misused. How much Bhutan has been successful in balancing this liberty restriction trade-off while fighting coronavirus? So, Dr. Benji or Dr. Pasang, could you respond to this?
Dr. Benji, please.
I thought
Maybe I go
leave it up
next.
to you. Well, I look at it from the sidelines, and you why don't you speak as a member of parliament, and I'll talk as an individual from the sidelines. I think one of the reasons for Bhutan's success in managing this pandemic thing is that we're listening to one leader, the king. He's there, and he's placing his life in danger. And there are things that we have to do, and obligations and duties. And everybody in the general interest of the entire country and the public, to keep ourselves safe, our loved and near and dear ones safe, must obey these rules and protocols and adhere to them in the strictest form. Because if it doesn't, we will lose control of a situation, and it might test us very severely. So to anybody who questions about misuse or that, in any situation, anywhere in the world, there is always a odd chance that one who will misuse his position or something. But that does not mean that it is happening rampantly and it's a policy of the government. Let that be understood clearly, that everything that we do, obeying very strict rules and very stringent rules, is to protect our society and keep us safe. So I hope you will understand that and the reason why we are. Maybe now from a member of parliament point of view, Dr. Pasang, I will ask you to say a few words on that.
I am not going to speak as a member of parliament. As the moderator made it very clear, I'm going to give my individual view. My individual view will be somewhere along the lines of the topic that we are discussing. The question says that how much we have been able to balance between the individual liberty and the collective welfare in light of the COVID situation in Bhutan. I think you are enjoying the liberty to the fullest, only as long as you respect the liberty of others.
Yeah.
In this situation, the nation is in problem. So I think the nation must come before individual. And when we talk about balancing the individual liberty and the collective welfare, we are also talking about liberty and order or disorder. The moment things go out of control, I think there won't be your individual liberty. It's all about protecting ourselves collectively. And I think it's very touching and simple for us to understand. We have, as a nation led by His Majesty the King, put the welfare of the people before anything else, even before His Majesty's own personal life. And also, of late, His Majesty has given financial help to the people in need from the reserve that he has kept for the country. That's such a huge gesture that one can expect as a citizen. But I think we know that there is a little bit of restrictions in movement, but I think this is very short term. What we sacrifice now will have a very good result in the long run. We are fighting this invisible enemy as a nation. So I think individual is a subset of that collective nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pasang. Yes, I think that's true. Possibly the idea of freedom and liberty are not absolute, you see. So let's go to the next question. There's a question from Mr. Pramit. This is from Nupur has forwarded this to us. The question is, we would like to know, how do you perceive Bhutan from South Asia perspective, and what outside world could learn from Bhutan and vice versa?
Well, Bhutan is part of South Asia, but let's put it this, as I said before, it's a unique part of South Asia. In fact, India often goes to places like Nepal, for example, and urges the Nepalese leadership to look at Bhutan and say, why don't you consider borrowing some of their principles and ideas, particularly, for example, in terms of hydroelectric power. And it's interesting to see how Nepal and Bhutan both have workers, they have the right of work, right of labor and residency in India. The Nepalese, for those who are from outside these South Asia, a Bhutanese citizen and a Nepalese citizen both have the right to go to India and work without any restrictions. I mean, they have effectively the same rights as an Indian citizen. We have, in theory at least, zero trade barriers between these countries. So the degree of integration. I'm not too sure about Bhutan, but I know in Nepal, almost at any given time, as much as 40% of the Nepalese workforce actually is in India working. They go back and forth, obviously, but there's a fairly large number, and even the armies of the two countries are joined, if you wish, at the hip to some degree, with the Nepalese army chief having a rank of Major General in the Indian Army. So these are very unusual relationships that India has. In fact, in many ways, I would argue almost no other, I can't think of any other three countries in the world who have a similar relationship, except arguably those which are members of the European Union, which of course is highly formalized as a political and financial monetary union. But I've said the Himalayan nations have an unusual position because they're geopolitically much more sensitive. The island nations, if you wish, of South Asia have a very different perspective on things, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, and so on, because they have a very different set of problems. They face climate change, for example, issues, existential ones. For the Maldivians, but for them it's sea level rise. That's the big problem. They literally fear being drowned by the ocean. That's not something Bhutan has to worry about. And the one country I think that all of us in South Asia need to be looking at much more closely, and I think this is true for Bhutan, already has a good relationship with them, is Bangladesh. If you look at the economic figures, Bangladesh is now the fastest growing economy in South Asia. Its GDP is now larger than Pakistan, despite being a much smaller country. Its per capita income is neck and neck with India and may actually pass India sometime in the next 1 year. It has become a major exporter. Recently, just like last week, I think, when Sri Lanka is facing a major foreign exchange crisis, the country that it turned to borrow $200 million worth of foreign exchange to buffer it was from Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is sitting on $60 billion worth of foreign exchange. Now that's small compared to India, but it's enormous for a country the size of Bangladesh. This is a major economic story. And if you look at a map, you realize that Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, to a lesser extent Myanmar, which has going down its own difficult path, are in many ways potentially can be part of a much larger network in which Bangladesh is a core part of. That was one of the ideas of the so-called BBIN that India proposed. Bhutan rightly, I think, decided that while it liked the idea of BBIN, it didn't want to be too closely integrated to it because of its concerns that this would result in a degree of transport and movement into Bhutan that would be disruptive. So Bhutan has to play an interesting game of trying to fit in, as I said, because of its unique role, especially its environmental and ecological status, of being part of this, but keeping enough distance that it can maintain its unique authority.
Thank you, Mr. Pramit. I think there are a lot of questions coming in, so I would like to ask the panelists to be very succinct, short, powerful answers would be appreciated. Let's go to, there is a question from Najmul Hussain. It says, freedom of speech and thought includes the opportunity to be critical or disagree with incumbent governments' policies and actions. Does an average Bhutanese have that right without fear or repercussions? Dr. Passan or Dr. Benji?
Dr. Passan?
Thank you. I would say that Bhutan, the constitution gives the right to freedom. We have the freedom of speech and opinion. And now, practically, how do we do that? We have more than 8 newspapers and mainstream newspapers. And some of them are very vibrant and also very critical of any government. We have had 3 successive governments, and I think none of the governments have been spared by the media, and they have been very critical. especially in the beginning when we started our democracy, media, I think, was very, very critical, and the train goes on. And more so, with the coming of the internet, the social media, internet has actually destroyed the social hierarchical structure. And it has actually given a platform not only to Bhutanese, but like elsewhere, the platform to give your views. So here, there are two channels in Bhutan. Number one, if you have opinions, if there are issues to be written about, mainstream media speak up. And second, if not, there are people taking to the social media to express their views and opinions. So maybe I cannot say that there is 100% sort of free expression of opinions, but as long as I'm concerned, given the context, I think we are doing fairly well in terms of giving the space for the people to express their opinion without fear and favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pasang. Let me go to Dasho Benji now. There's a question for you, Dasho, directly. Give a brief explanation on Bhutan's conservation efforts.
Thank you very much. Well, to start off, when we first started many years ago on our conservation efforts, it was basically when I started the Royal Society for Protection of Nature. It's just a one-man show. And it's been built up slowly with partners, with WWF USA, and with other conservation partners. We have built it up slowly. And one of the most important things is our own Bhutanese are now walking the talk. They've come up to this stage. They're doing wonderful things in their research work. You know, you can see them on social media. And I think the efforts of conservation in Bhutan are highly commendable and going on a very wonderful journey. For this, I think we have His Majesty, the fourth king, who kept our natural environment intact till all these people came of age and are able to do the things that they're able to do today. So please, I think there are, of course, a few glitches we all have. And one of the things that we have, which I would like to all the people to know about, is that we also have a fund, the first ever fund in the world established, called the Bhutan's Trust Fund for Environmental Protection. And it started very humbly. And the first pledge came from WWF USA of 1 million, and we built that up. And today we have nearly $70 million. And I think that managed properly, it can continue to grow. And I personally, when I first floated the idea of having this fund, I wanted $200 million. And I think that target is now reachable. But we have to do the right things with that money. So please, if you're interested in conservation in Bhutan, it's all there on social media, BirdLife Society of Bhutan, avifauna, flora of Bhutan, orchids of Bhutan, you name it, it's all there. And wonderful people doing wonderful work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dasho. Now, the question to Mr. Pramit. Is Bhutan in China's Road and Belt Initiative focus? Does China, where did it go? Just a minute. Okay.
I saw the question. I'll answer it.
You saw the question? Okay, good. Yeah.
So yes, so Bhutan, China did request Bhutan to join the BRI, the Belt Road Initiative, in 2018. But Bhutan, because of its closeness to India, in part, has declined to join the BRI. There's no formal agreement on BRI, as in nor does India, and has refused to attend the BRI forums. Strangely, however, if you look at China's website on the BRI, it lists Bhutan as a member. But I should add, it also lists India as a member as well, even though India is one of the loudest and strongest opponents of the BRI. But that's, I think, China's own game. The other part of the question was, does China put pressure on respect Bhutan's borders? And the answer is no. As we all know, there is continuing problems. They have continued to press on the segments of the northern area. I've forgotten the name of the wildlife sanctuary up in the north, which is one of the sources of dispute. Of course, we mentioned the Dolam Plateau earlier. There's a recent article in Foreign Policy by Dr. Robert Barnett of Columbia describing how since roughly 2008, China has been building villages inside Bhutanese territory and using that to leverage for diplomatic pressure on Bhutan on other issues. This is part, I would argue, not just something that China does with Bhutan, but it does so with almost all of its neighbors, territorially and on the maritime side. But a lot of the demands that China makes, I think that they change over time. But among them have been the question of asking for diplomatic relations, or formal diplomatic relations, or an ambassadorship, which at present still doesn't exist, between the two countries. They've been pushing very hard for better road connection. They wanted I think the Tremor-La path to be converted into a highway, which India has pointed out would require India to then move its military forces right into Bhutan as a preemptive measure. And more recently, they've demanded that concessions on the Dolam Plateau be made in return. These are standard Chinese practices. Maybe you could argue standard practice of any great power when it comes to a smaller country. But it feeds into what I was talking about earlier, that these are the kind of pressures that will increase over the next decade as great power rivalry becomes much, much more intense in the world today.
Thank you, Mr. Pramit. We have some questions again. Let's go back to now the Bhutanese panelist. This is a question from Mr. Yubaraj Khanel, and he's asking, what is the relationship between happiness indicator and access to development facilities? Are Bhutanese citizens happy with the fulfillment of basic needs or with less contact with the outside world? So any one of you could respond to this?
Dr. Pasang, I think you're very much qualified to answer that.
We men as progressive human beings have desire for happiness as well as wealth accumulation. When we talk about gross national happiness, I think some of the international audience seem to have been misunderstood what we actually stand for. When we say that we give importance to gross national happiness, there is some sort of belief or some understanding that Bhutan does not focus much on development, but more on happiness. I think this is a little not true argument. What we are saying is that we do not undertake development activities at the cost of environment, at the cost of imbalance, at the cost of balanced development, at the cost of conservation of our environment, and at the cost of good governance. So what we are trying to say is that when we make our development philosophy as gross national happiness, we are trying to say that it is very important for a nation like ours to strike a balance. And we are saying that development activities are actually means to a larger goal, that is happiness for the people. But we are not saying that to pursue happiness, we need to discard development activities. And the last part of the question is very subjective. Are Bhutanese people happy with minimum sort of basic needs that they have at the disposal? I think that is very subjective, but the research actually shows that in Bhutan, people are happy, but if we say that how much you are happy, then it is again a very subjective one. So what the research that we have is that fairly given the situation or the material things that we have in our life, I think comparatively we are happier than the people who are elsewhere with the same amount of access to the wealth and facilities. So maybe this is a little bit sort of a misunderstanding that Bhutan discards development activities at the cost of by pursuing happiness. Maybe this is a little bit not out of track in terms of understanding the philosophy.
Thank you, Dr. Passon. Now there's a question from former Swedish Minister for Employment, Mr. Sven Littorin, who says he's also a good friend of Bhutan. And his question is, I know that half of your population is under 28. What could we do from other countries in Europe to keep them happy? I'm thinking of building stronger ties in education, entrepreneurship, and those sectors where the geographic location is of less importance, as to make it possible for the young people to stay and contribute to the economy and the future. So again, any of the
please.
panelists?
Yeah, I interact a lot with the young people, and I don't say that I am a spokesperson for them, but I have seen this country grow in its early stages. And when we first started our development programs and educating everybody, we were not a very rich country. There were not many people we could grow. Our population was very small. I think our population was less than 500,000. Yeah, about 400,000 would be more correct. In those times, you were able, when we started educating people, we gave them jobs, we found employment, the country was growing. But today we are at a crossroads. We're at a saturation point. We cannot employ everybody we educate. That's a fact. And that sometimes brings unhappiness because people don't know how to get employment, because we have just missed a step in our thing at this crossroads over here. And this transition has to take place, and the government has to provide this transition to tell people, hey, we can't give you a job anymore. You have to, we will educate you, but you will have to find and educate yourself to get your own job. I think that is what we have, a message we have to get over to the young. I think we have a very wonderful, vibrant young community. They're very innovative. They are, when their sincerity goes in, very hardworking and very innovative. And many of them are now going out to find employment outside. That's fine, but because they're still contributing to the growth of the country by sending money back home. And one of the things which is very also a good fact is that they're going out, but they're all coming back. You'll find. So there's not much of what you might call a brain drain. I wonder if you agree with me there, Dr. Passon. Would you have anything to add on that? Thank you.
Not really, please.
Okay, so anyway, that was a good answer. I know that the show actually has a very good relationship with young people in Bhutan, and they look up to him as their, grandfather, with a lot of answers to their questions. So anyway, there's another interesting question. This can be for any of you. The question is, it has been forwarded by Dr. Carlston Klein, and the question is, in an increasingly multilateral environment, can Bhutan play a role of an actor on the international stage, and with which focus? And in which fields can it be an honest broker?
Pramit, isn't that your field? Your specialty?
It's my specialty, but I'm not Bhutanese, so I'd assume that somebody.
Make you an honorary Bhutanese.
So, well, actually, as you may know, Cooch Behar and Darjeeling were part of the older ancient Chinese kingdom before the arrival of the British. But anyway, let's put it this way. Multilateral diplomacy is extraordinarily difficult. Even India struggles. to do multilateralism because you have to have an enormous degree of influence. But let me put it this way. In my view, climate is going to be the #1 multilateral issue over the next 50 years. We see this already in the United States. The Biden administration in their discussions with India said literally nothing more important for the world and America. We see this with the Europeans. So where does Bhutan fit in with this? My argument would be that Bhutan has it's not so much that Bhutan should be able to go out and try to bring countries together. I think they're already doing that. But what Bhutan can do and should do is to be able to, by working with other governments and asking them for help. I mean, the Swedish individual who asked the question, what can we do to help? Is that, as I said, it's climate resilience that is going to be the immediate issue that Bhutan has to face. Because no matter how much goodness you do on the climate side, if the rest of the world is making a mess of it, you will be affected. So you have to learn how to absorb the damage that is going to be inflicted on you by this climate area. And I think what Bhutan should be doing is going out to other countries in the world, and I hope Biden's climate summit will be one place, and saying, look, help us develop climate resiliency, make us an example for the other parts of the world in a similar ecosystem. There are mountain countries everywhere in the world that are going to be affected. If you help us succeed, not only will we be an inspiration in terms of what we have done in terms of being carbon negative, but more importantly, we'll show that you can survive climate and learn how to live with climate change in a manner that is not massively politically and economically disruptive. And I think this idea of Bhutan being a model for climate resilience is a multilateral effort. And it's something Bhutan should be going out and saying, come and help us, and you'll be able to help yourself.
Thank you very much, Pramod. That was very well put. I couldn't have put it better. And I requested you to do this because you put it so well, because if I had to answer it, I would speak in much stronger terms, which people may not be too happy about. Thank you.
Okay, so
do you have anything, Dr. Pasan?
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Pasan, can you make it really crisp?
I'll try to be very short I will answer this at 2 levels. As a scholar of small states, I really believe in the power of small states. Those days, the international political architecture was such that the affairs were dominated by the big powers. Now, I think there is also a slow shift of international power agency to the small states. Some of the small states have now become the net security provider to some of the big states. So especially in this context, Bhutan, I think, has opportunities to play a role in terms of, as Pramod pointed out, climate resilience. And I think more importantly, we have a standing sort of a national belief or the agenda that our purpose is to promote happiness in the world and also peace in the world. So maybe a small state becoming a smart state to champion for the global development agendas. That is where Bhutan has the potential. For example, in environment, even in the philosophy of gross national happiness, climate resilience, and also promoting peace. So to use the language of international relations, I think Bhutan has a potential to focus on promoting soft power, a small state becoming a smart state through the promotion of soft power. So maybe that's where our role can come in the multilateralism. That's how I look at it. Thank you very much.
Okay, Dr. Pasan, thank you. Let's go to possibly the last question, because there are a number of them, but we're running out of time. This is from Mr. Reinhard Wolf of German Bhutan Himalaya Society, and he again talks about youth unemployment as one of the major challenges that was mentioned by all the 3 panelists. And he says that at the same time, Bhutan faces a shortage of qualified craftsmen that's plumbers and masons, partly due to lockdown. The government has now launched the Build Bhutan project to address this issue, and some German master trainers are already in Bhutan to provide training. So the question is, what can be done to raise the interest of Bhutanese youth in blue-collar jobs? So any of you could answer this. Maybe Dr. Benji or Dr. Pasang, since
Maybe our godfather of our youth.
Okay. Dasho, you need to switch on your mic again. Dasho, it got switched off again. Dasho, your mic is switched off.
Okay, sorry. Got it. Yeah, it's very difficult to try and get people. What will our youth, what are they prepared to do here in Bhutan? It's all psychological, maybe it's to do with society, their status in society. They won't shovel shit at home, but they will go to America or Australia and shovel shit. So that's the thing. Somewhere slowly the change of mentality has to change. And maybe as our country economic well-being improves, people will be able to stay home, and they will not be afraid to work with their hands. So I think it's just a question of time. It's just a question of getting an approach, getting to people that there is no shame in working with your hands. In Switzerland, when I was there as ambassador, some of the best paid workers are all the blue collar workers, and they're the ones who drive Mercedes-Benz. So people have to realize that, and there are young people who are realizing that, and that they are into delivering services and providing and becoming innovative in the way that they survive. But this doesn't get to everybody. I think there are certain institutes in the country which are helping people to startups. I think the Loden Foundation, the iBest Institute, and there are others, the Tech Park and all. There are people who are encouraging people to set up businesses on their own and to scale, and many young. But unfortunately, there's one thing where they sometimes suffer, and the thing is that they have everything that they do is wonderful, but there's no market. We're such a small market. If they were in India and they were doing it and they had this huge population, they'd be fantastic successes because their ideas are so good, and they do it so well. But here in Bhutan, then when you think, and then it's a small market. And if one person becomes successful in capturing a market there, then everybody sees that person capturing, and then 10 other businesses start, and then they eat into that same market. And those are some of the difficulties I think that people face. Thank you.
Okay, just thank you, Dr. Pasang. Maybe just one or two lines from you, and then we're going to wind up.
Especially I want to answer to the person who asked this question. Let me be honest, we have got, maybe we haven't been able to get our vocational and technical and vocational education right. So we are still looking at it. And to give you a figure, our population is very young. Our median age is around 23, and we have more than 50% of our population under the age of 35. So there is a huge potential. And if we get our technical and vocational education right, I think we are going to do well, and we are in the process of doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all the three panelists. And we are now approaching to the close of our session. Let me quickly, maybe just very briefly recap some of the salient points made by our panelists on different aspects of Bhutan. And to start with, Dr. Wangchuck again, Honorable MP from Germany, Dr. Bettina Wangchuck, talked about happiness of people and how happiness of people and the state of environment are closely related, and why they're so important today. If you look at what's happening around the world, I think the way we exploit Mother Nature for our grid, I think is very alarming. And this is where ideas of happiness and values and human well-being come into, restrain ourselves from being, I guess, thieves and dacoits. Then, of course, she also talked about how Bhutan and Germany, I think there's a good prospect as we move ahead for the small country like Bhutan to associate and, of course, learn from Germany, and also maybe export some of our own knowledge and wisdom to Germany. So possibly the cross-learning that can happen between these two countries, I think there's a lot of potential now with the formal ties being, ties being formalized recently. We look forward to, of course, engaging more with Germany. Dr. Benji, thank you for your wonderful recap of how Bhutan and Germany started their association long time back. And obviously, I think a lot of interesting comments you made as, of course, the fountainhead of conservation in Bhutan. You have contributed a lot to what Bhutan is today in terms of especially one of the major pillars, conservation. I think that's where Dr. Benji probably and deservedly gets his credit. Obviously, Mr. Pramit talked about some three challenges primarily. Number one being climate change and its possible impact on Bhutan and her economy, because we are so dependent on hydropower. We are looking at diversifying economy, but I think that takes time. And now with COVID having closed international borders, there's a lot of introspection going on among the Bhutanese as to how we can become a more resilient society economically. How can we be better prepared to tackle these unforeseen challenges? Of course, and the third part, the great game, again, up and Bhutan being caught between, the increasingly deteriorating relationship of these two giants and Bhutan in between. There's a saying that, whether the two elephants fight or make love, it always hurts the little ant. And that's our, situation in Bhutan. But obviously, I think we have come of age to talk about and also appreciate our own idea of sovereignty as a sovereign nation state that took a very long time to come of age, and especially to announce ourselves at world stage that Bhutan is an independent country with a very unique body politic and with a very unique set of challenges. And our identity has positioned ourselves as one of, I guess, important, nation states, especially in South Asia. Of course, then Dr. Pasang also talked about constitutional mandates that Bhutan has, guaranteed to people to create that enabling environment to pursue happiness. We talked about Bhutan's, maybe we might not be able to meet our people's, demand for material happiness. But then I guess we do have conditions laid out in terms of minimum basic standard for people to live happily. And beyond that, I think it's not the responsibility of the state. I think it's also the responsibility of the people to find ways to make their life meaningful and pursue happiness. Obviously, Q&A saw a lot of good questions from different parts of the countries and all aspects of Bhutan. The recent Indo-China relations, and how Bhutan has been caught in between. Then we have also had questions on conservation again. Youth, that is probably the biggest wealth of Bhutan today, untapped wealth of Bhutan. And I think our government, we have policies in place. Dr. Pasang mentioned that possibly we went wrong with our technical and vocational education policy, but it's not too late, because I guess we have a huge, wonderful human resource pool in our young people that we can tap and take advantage of. Obviously, we will need help and ideas from our friends and neighbors from outside Bhutan, people who have gone through a similar phase in their countries who can contribute ideas, and also we need to contextualize those ideas within our own unique set of challenges and opportunities. With this, I would like to now conclude formally the panel discussion and hand over to Dr. Carlston Klein for his concluding remarks. Dr. Klein.
Yeah, really, thank you very much, Gopi. Nothing much to add. I could only express really my thanks to Honorable Ms. Bettina Stark-Watzinger, and especially also to our panelists, Honorable Dr. Dashu Benji, Honorable Dr. Pasang Doji, dear Mr. Pramit Pal Chuter, and moderator Gopilal Acharya, for your really very, very valuable insights, comments, and the very engaging discussion. Thank you very much also for the many questions. Well, with this very humble certificates to all of you, would like to express our real appreciation to you. And well, we are very, very sure that we have the opportunity to meet you in person soon. I offer also my sincere thanks to all of you, our distinguished guests, who took your time to attend this online seminar, and to the office of Friedrich-Naumann Foundation, especially in North Rhine-Westphalia. Dear Mrs. Kölker, thank you for great efforts for organizing this. Thanks also to our team in the regional office in South Asia, especially to you, Nupur Hasija, for also preparing that and bringing in your different efforts. A special thanks to Mrs. Kama Choden, an alumnus of our foundation from Bhutan, who supported us. Without this whole event would not have been possible. Let me just also add that we are very pleased to help Bhutanese citizens fighting the pandemic. So in case, and we could of course inspire you, you would like to donate, please do that to the Red Cross Society of Bhutan. We are going to mention that on our homepages. Well, and as Friedrich-Naumann Foundation South Asia, we will definitely continue our engagement. And we are presently, as you know, exploring our opportunities to expand our work in Bhutan and foster deeper relations between our two countries. And this discussion here tonight was really a very, very good inspiration to go ahead on that path. I wish you now a very good health. Of course, I wish you happiness during these extraordinary times. Have a very safe Nachhauseweg, a good way home. Good night to you all, and thank you again for this wonderful discussion. We will see you sooner than later. Thanks and goodbye.
Thank you.